Hello and welcome to Emergent. I'm your host, Reed Summers. It's my pleasure today to talk with you about breakthrough investigations into non-human intelligence. I will be joined by friend and colleague Ted Roe, the executive director of the UAP Medical Coalition, and we're going to be talking with you about a breakthrough set of research and scientific and investigatory efforts to uncover the fundamental reality, presence, and potential activity of a non-human intelligent form of life. Before I begin, I'd like to welcome you to the show. If you're not yet a subscriber, please subscribe, like the show, share the show. It helps a ton to get this out there and to get more people from the public thinking about these topics and paying attention to what ultimately could be one of the biggest stories in human history, and yet one that is almost untold in today's world and in the news today. And that is our potential contact and engagement with a non-human form of intelligent life. In today's episode, I'm going to explore this new investigatory series that I have had a part in launching, along with Ted Roe and UAPmed and the Human Institute. Ted and I will talk about the series. What is it trying to do? How is it going to do it? And why is this fundamentally a breakthrough moment in our understanding of non-human intelligence and the more observable aspects of the phenomenon of unidentified anomalous phenomena, or UAP. After that, we'll talk a bit about Ted's background, his life's work and research, the work of UAPmed, and then we'll come back to the series and preview the first speaker's lecture, which will take place actually tomorrow at 5 o'clock Eastern, live streaming on the Human Institute YouTube channel. And we'll look at other speakers to come and kind of explore the path forward and this roadmap into the uncharted terrain of our human encounter with other forms of intelligent life. So to begin, Investigating Non-Human Intelligence is a lecture and panel series created by the Human Institute in partnership with UAPmed. This investigatory series arose out of a strong sense of need and exigency to use the best minds and the best methods of science, research, and investigation targeted on the question and the dilemma and the enigma of this potential existence, presence, and activity of non-human intelligence. Human Institute stood up this series and leveraged the extensive knowledge and historic work and activity of UAPmed, and together the two organizations are partnering to bring this forward to the public. So with that, I'd like to share with you a brief trailer to the series, and then we'll talk more about what it is and what it will bring forward to the public, and then I'll bring Ted on to break that all down.
The conversation on UAPs and non-human intelligence has long been shaped by experience, speculation, and secrecy. What's missing is a coherent approach, one that separates data from interpretation and evidence from belief. Humanity now stands at a threshold. Encountering a non-human reality is not only a scientific mystery, it's a civilizational challenge. We must move beyond ideology and secrecy toward a science of contact, grounded in evidence, methods, and shared human values. The Human Institute is building that foundation. The Investigating Non-Human Intelligence series is the first public multidisciplinary forum dedicated to developing the scientific and ethical foundations for researching our human encounter with non-human intelligence. The series convenes leading scientists, philosophers, and field investigators to explore new approaches, methods, and emerging data and findings to ultimately generate breakthrough discoveries in non-human intelligent phenomena. These one-hour presentations bring forward serious work by serious people, charting a roadmap for a new science capable of understanding and managing the unknown responsibly before it manages us. We invite scholars, experiencers, and all who seek clarity to join us. It's time to rise above speculation and take a deliberate step toward a grounded, evidence-based response to the existence of non-human intelligence.
All right. So investigating non-human intelligence, I have the slide up right here, is a roughly monthly lecture and panel series that will be running all throughout next year, exploring those 8 dimensions of this investigation into NHI, non-human intelligence. The first lecture is this Friday, tomorrow at 5 o'clock Eastern. It will be given by PhD philosopher of science Michael Cifone, who is the executive director of the Society for UAP Studies and the chief editor of the Limina Journal. Michael Cifone will be giving a lecture titled Toward a Science of Non-Human Intelligence, and I'm very excited about what this could bring forward. And with that, I'd like to invite Ted Roe on screen to join me to talk about this lecture, the series as a whole, and the bigger picture. What are we trying to do in investigating NHI? Why do we need to do it? And how do we do it? So welcome, Ted, to the show. Great to see you here on Emergent.
Thank you, Reed. It's a privilege and a pleasure.
Well, I've enjoyed our conversations and getting to know each other over the last few months. And it's been an exciting journey getting this new series launched and into the public and beginning to gather together the best minds of science, research, and investigation to really crack the nut on this issue, this enigma of who or what is functioning in the world, potentially engaging human beings in the air and on the ground, and potentially playing a part in what we see more visibly in the UAP UFO phenomenon. So, Ted, share with me your thoughts on what we need to be doing at this point in the long journey of gathering data and evidence on UFOs, surmising and speculating on the intelligent origin of these structured craft. What do we need to do now to advance the discourse and really gain solid insight into what we are encountering?
Well, it seems to me that there's been a gap between the evidence-based research, the forensic research, as we're referring to it, and science's ability to digest it. We have a limit to what we can understand with science in its current form. And when it comes to engaging a non-human intelligence, we just don't have that framework yet to even be able to approach the conversation. How do we assess it? How do we identify it? What can we learn about it? All of that right now is it's at a loss. We just don't have that capacity. And I've seen this in developing programs like the program at the AIAA. I was one of the founding members there at the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics. And the problem was that nobody had a common knowledge base. There was no foundational information. And that's why I was so excited when you approached me with your idea about this investigating non-human intelligence series, was that it's set up in a manner so that each series builds on the next. So right. We're starting with a foundational understanding of what's necessary to try to approach the phenomenon. How do we lay basic scientific foundation to even ask the question of whether it's there or not? And then where do we go from there?
Right.
So far, we found we've done a lot of research in terms of cases, but we haven't really found a way to coalesce it into an understanding of science of how do we approach non-human intelligence. So,
yeah. Great, Ted. Well, it's been a pleasure getting this birthed and underway, and super excited about the first lecture tomorrow. For those who want to attend, you can go to humaninstitute.org/NHI and register right on the page, and you'll get reminders when we go live. You'll get priority access to Q&A with the speakers, and you'll get updates on emerging data and research. So please go sign up, register for the series, subscribe to the Human Institute on YouTube, and you'll get those notifications. In tomorrow's lecture, we're going to hear from Michael Cifone, who's going to present what I think is foundational work at the philosophical level, articulating our frame of reference in how we would approach analyzing and collecting the data regarding a potential NHI, but also some of the dilemmas and challenges that have obstructed the field so far. And you brought up the word forensic, and I know Michael will talk about, the historic ufology that we all have come to know, and which has generated important insight as primarily a forensic exercise.
Mhm.
But it's rearward looking, right? It's a cold case. It's done and over. And so the frame that we would use to analyze what happened, what it means, what the intelligences were, what their intentions were, is extremely limited. And this transition from a forensic analysis of hard facts, nuts and bolts, objects in the sky, to a more relational analysis, looking at behavior and a larger relational lens, I think is an extremely important and critical way to begin the conversation. And Michael will talk about what he would call an epistemic loop, where the forensic effort would make claims of either an extraterrestrial entity or an abduction, for example, and yet the evidence necessary to substantiate that grows and grows and grows, and we don't even have the epistemology, let alone the ability to ontologically explain the potential entities involved and the interaction that might be occurring. So this step back and widening of the lens, I think, is really important as a foundation.
Oh, I agree. I agree 100%. We've never been confronted by this particular type of problem. To understand an intelligence that's probably based off world, and to know anything about it all without expanding our own empiricism to the point where we can really see, where we can engage it. That's been the struggle. We're stuck, and and I think Michael's mapping a path forward, and I'm very excited to hear his presentation tomorrow.
Yeah. And so, Ted, where do you see the conversation as it stands today? What's the current state of the conversation on UAP and the potential of an NHI?
Well, I see it as stalled myself. I've spent decades on the forensic side, collecting cases, working with pilots through NARCAP, National Aviation Reporting Center, on anomalous phenomena. And I collected a lot of cases. I talked to a lot of pilots. But the data, I could put together data, I could compile it into groups, I could massage it left and right. But what I couldn't do is get it upline into the scientific community and stimulate curiosity through their own skill set. And that was really difficult. And it wasn't until the ODNI report came out and they acknowledged that they're an aviation safety hazard, which we had contended for 20 years prior, that started to make any sense at all. And I was able to do a little bit of work with AIAA on that particular problem. But we're stalled. We've got independent lines of effort. We've got people working with experiencers and people with UAP exposure. We've got people working with nuts and bolts, hard forensic data, as you say, back-looking data, that's really open to interpretation. That's why you never get to a decision on whether or not it was aliens or not, even if it couldn't hardly have been anything else but. It's because it's always it remains open to interpretation. So that's where the nuts and bolts crowd are right now. And then policy making is kind of off the table at this particular point. I mean, there's not going to be a new amendment to the NDAA that's UAP related this year.
Yeah, right.
And as far as actually building policy that protects our communities and our society from the toxicity of UAP related information that's unfiltered and may not even be correct. All of that we're suffering these impacts as well. So there's a lot of confusion, there's a lot of chaos, a lot of people talking, but in terms of moving things forward, not really. We've got some nuts and bolts teams that are developing detection modalities, which are probably the most promising area right now. If I was going to point anybody at where to go to find anything really useful, but
Right.
That's my
So
assessment.
thank you
It's
for
a
that. Yeah, I think it's a challenging terrain. So just to recap what you shared, Ted. So there's the experiencer side, individuals who are having direct encounters, either at a consciousness-based level or a physical level,
Mhm.
as they would claim. And then there are lots of interpretations and belief systems around that, what it is, what it means, is it good, is it not good? There's the nuts and bolts side, and there's the rearward looking aspect of that, which is looking at historic cases in which many of the individuals involved have now deceased. No data has come forward in years. These cases have gone quite cold. And then there's new efforts to uncover detection and tracking data of UAP now in real time and going forward, which
Mhm.
is very exciting. And I know the Human Institute is playing a part in standing up a tracking UAP detection and tracking summit early next year. And I think there's a lot of good efforts now to advance that field and to converge it into some kind of coalition. But in large part today, it's a bunch of distinct research groups, startups, academic organizations that are working on their own kind of research footing. They're doing different things in the field. They're largely not synced up, which is a large reason why the Tracking Summit was created. And then there's the policy side, which in a strange sense might actually be quite active, but not in a way that we can perceive, right? We hear of
Right.
Congress, having back channel conversations, getting people into the SCIF, the compartmental something, special access compartmented information facility, if I were to whiff at that acronym.
Yeah.
And they're having these conversations behind closed doors, but these individuals are managed by non-disclosure agreements, classification regimes. So we don't have access to what the quote policy side might be shaping into. And so there are these distinct pieces of the pie, and working in ways that often conflict or clash with each other. And I've of course heard that. I've heard experiencers cry out from the audience in large rooms that were focused on the nuts and bolts side, right?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
likewise, I've heard the scientific academic community cry out when people just put out their unfiltered speculations and beliefs about what and who is here. So there seems to be some clash, at times conflict. So how do we advance this field in its current state, given our current capabilities? Our detection and tracking capabilities are there, but they're limited. We have limited amounts of data coming from the government and from the military. The international community is radio silent on this issue. I hear almost nothing except an occasional tremor from within the EU or possibly South America, right?
Mhm.
So there's very little happening there. How do we, as a society and as engaged citizens, advance our collective acknowledgement of what is here, our understanding of what it is and what it's doing, and then ultimately our response to it? Because we have to respond if we're being engaged as a species.
Well, we I think we need to engage the professional cadres and the academics in our society. We need to present information to them in language that they understand, that stimulates them to move forward, to look more closely. And psychologists should be talking to the APA, writing papers and working on ideas around it. But part of the problem, Reed, is that there are a lot of different viewpoints on this, and they tend to be adversarial.
Mhm.
Some people have belief systems that are not shaped like others believe. And I think what's really important right now is to ground ourselves in logic and foundational information. Don't get caught up in go out in the weeds in terms of dimensionality and all the other topics that are floating around out there. Focus on the psychosocial impacts of the exposures themselves and the information about the exposures.
Mhm.
Find a way to engage, to prepare law enforcement, to prepare psychology, to prepare mental health and medical folks on how to best serve people that are claiming UAP exposures. Normalize that information, that it happens and that people suffer because of it, and try to do
Mhm.
something about that. And if you focus on the human side of all this, that starts to normalize some of the rest of it. So that's just some ideas I have around that.
Yeah.
Part of our initiatives with UAPmed are to move out into these different groups and offer information that's helpful. There are some really good papers in psychology that are out already on people claiming abduction or anomalous trauma and how to treat them, proper approaches. It's all very good. And what we need is to expand that conversation. I know.
I appreciate.
I'm just going to take another moment here.
Yeah.
I am an experiencer myself. I have UAP exposures that go back to when I was 5 years old, and none of that's been good for me. And our social stance on what these things are or might be is so fractured that it's only made things worse for myself and for people in my shoes that aren't particularly enamored with what they've been through. So that's kind of driven my interest with UAPmed to try to find a way to normalize the information and to start protecting society, individuals, their families, their communities, the social fabric.
Thank you. Well, Ted, thank you for converting a challenging set of events and experiences into a productive course of action on behalf of society. And I commend you and UAPmed for the work you've done. And I want to get into it actually and talk with the listeners more about the organization and your work and efforts. You mentioned, as possibly one of the first lines of effort is to engage the professional organizations, right? To engage the existing disciplines academically, but also to activate the levers of our society and its institutions, many of which are not, if not driven, informed by those disciplines. I think it's very important. And a lot of folks might want to throw that out and say, we don't have time for science. They're here. We have to do something or embrace them, resist them, etc. And I would say, hold on, wait. We are engaged in a species-wide process of acknowledgement, of contending with a presence that is operating according to its own intentions, whatever those may be, and certainly its own cognitive motives and prerogatives. And we have to bring, to the degree possible, all of us into this field and use all the resources available. And a lot of those resources exist in the mainstream of human life, that part of society that is completely ignorant that this is even happening. And so we cannot abandon that mainstream. We have to engage it. And the question is, how do you engage it? And there's been something of a firewall in place, either due to the accidental poor mental discipline of the UFO community in leaping to conclusions, to running off theory and speculation, to taking in, the narratives of bad actors who have polluted the space. There may also be a firewall in place due to the intentional obfuscation efforts by governments, military organizations, defense entities, and corporations, not to mention the activity and the obfuscation of the phenomenon itself. There could be a non-human component to what has erected a firewall between this community that is aware, but has also, I think, been fed false narratives, and the mainstream, which is completely unaware. And so how do we begin to break down this wall, right? It's almost like the wall that separates East and West, Berlin in that analogy. How do we break this down? And you used a word that I want to talk about with you, foundational information, that there is a foundation of data that is missing. And maybe we can talk about what is that data? What have we not gone out and sought out as data to substantiate the phenomenon?
Well, first off, let me say that we have a lot of data, good foundational data. The foundational in the sense of the interpretation of it. We look at it and we say, okay, this data, this tells us basic things. We don't jump to any conclusion about what that might mean. We look at the data. So Hynek did this towards the end of his career. He collected all of these different characteristics of UAP exposures, people who had claimed to have had interactive exposures to UAP, or UFOs as he was calling them then. And there was no conjecture. It was just a list of, this happened, telepathy happened, these kind of things happen. And these are all commonalities that people report in these exposures with no projection on it. You know, we've got 50 years of stuff piled on top of the core narrative, the foundational information. And then the other side of that foundational information is the foundational science to be able to digest it and to apply it to an issue of non-human intelligence and have some confidence that it means something, that the knowledge is good, you know, the epistemology is solid. I think what we do and the way I've done it is to look for the best examples of the UAP presence to begin with, and then find professionals that were willing to say some things about what ought to be done. Like Dr. Keith Taylor helped us write a paper on first responder protocols for first responders that might be dealing with UAP exposures or encounter them themselves while they're at work. So you just start with that. You start moving that information out there and normalizing it, and you make it available. And then people are talking about it, and it becomes normal. And then politicians need to become aware of it if they want to get elected, you know. And eventually you end up with a national policy, you know.
Right. Well, current federal administrators have said that the UAP issue is one of the most popular on the campaign trail. They're asked about that at times the most above any other issue, which is surprising. You may not think that there's that much mainstream appetite for that. But Ted, I'd like to dive into UAPmed and your work, because I think folks are at this point pretty interested to hear more about what you've done to equip first responders and individuals charged with protecting public safety, equipping them with what they need to support experiencers and to learn how to serve people in the context of this potential new paradigm, this new reality of our human and non-human interactions. So tell us about your historic work and UAPmed, how it got started, what it's been doing.
Well, I founded UAPmed in 2002, May of 2002. I was living in the jungle in Hawaii, and I had a cell phone. So I started it with there and a couple of people. And the idea basically was to spend I spent a lot of years working on the nuts and bolts and forensic side of things, and never working on my own exposures, not really talking about them in public or just in passing, kind of just to keep the conversation moving, but never in detail and never really deeply engaged them. I knew that they had a huge impact on my own psychology day to day. And there were times when that was unbearable, that just functioning at all was almost impossible. So I realized that there was a need. You know, I had it, and anybody else who's been exposed to these things and wasn't happy about it has it also. And so I started designing an organization, but things were moving so quickly at the time. This was after the ODNI report, and there was a lot of adaptation going on. Arrow got stood up in that same month. I had been invited to stand up the program at AIAA in September of 2021, and that had me busy along with running NARCAP. But it became really clear that, you know, the nuts and bolts side was very focused on how those pretty lights move around. But nobody really wanted to talk about the psychosocial impacts of these exposures, about, you know, the greater implications that come from these things. So I started putting together the organization, and we went through a lot of iterations, had a lot of different people come and go in the process of trying to figure out how to ground ourselves. And then we finally found the path about 2 years ago, year and a half ago. And that's when we set up our charter and everything. And then our work has been to prepare core papers like our founder's statement, what we are, why we exist, what the change in circumstance was that brought us to this place, which was the acknowledgement of the government, the ODNI report. You know, when they admitted that UAP existed, that they're a threat to national security, that they're a hazard to aviation safety, that there's a stigma in place that is inhibiting engagement. You know, it gave me a little bit of the authority behind our own mission to push,
Okay. So 2022 Office of the Director of National Intelligence report, federal confirmation of existence and presence of unidentified aerial and undersea phenomena.
Yeah.
I think they were unidentified aerial phenomena at the time. Aerial became anomalous. Anomalous has been proposed to be aerial undersea. You and I have talked about the challenge of this UAP acronym as being lacking specificity and allowing things to be entertained that may not actually be a core part of the fundamental phenomena we need to solve. But tell us about then the work that UAPmed has done since. What have you learned about the experiencer community, the nature of these exposures, the nature of potential flight safety hazards? What's come to light?
Okay, so we started interviewing witnesses, people claiming UAP exposure, and we devised a battery of questions that were the kind of questions that you would expect from a room full of psychologists who might be watching this on a screen. What the questions they would want asked. And so we set up this panel of questions, and then we started running witnesses through this series. And that was very, very informative, and I've been told quite persuasive. That helped us develop some ideas around psychological outreach. And we've made a few overtures. We had some communication with APA, the American Psychology Association, and they didn't want to pick it up publicly and run with it, but they didn't dismiss us outright either. We were treated fairly well. There's more to come on that, I would think. Whether or not we have point on that, I don't know. But we've developed relationships with other organizations like Unhidden, and we're supportive in their startup, and support their core motivations as well. The idea is to develop some coalition around the subject, but it needs to be grounded. It needs to be based on fundamental understandings, and needs to be able to stand up to the rigor of scientific research and publication. So that's what I've been trying to do, is formulate all of this into a way that moves this information in the language of science, and ultimately is supportive to people like myself that have had these exposures and literally nothing to work on, living in a society that won't believe you.
Yeah.
A lot of
It's
people
definitely an
remember.
upstream swim.
Well, you think about that guy, Ron Neary, from Close Encounters of the Third Kind, Spielberg's movie. And, he went through the whole thing in about 2 hours, right? From the exposure to the incredulity to losing his family and his job to resolving it with the aliens and living happily ever after. Most of us don't get that. We get our lives destroyed, our families stressed out, our existence challenged, and then we hang there. And so that's what UAPmed's about, is trying to change that.
Yeah, advancing our fundamental knowledge of the experience that's being had, which can vary. It's not one experience, right? It's a distribution, but what is the distribution? What's the range? And what are the characteristics of the experience, of the event, the characteristics of the entities in the event scenario that might take place? This is foundational knowledge. And I think many would say within the UFO community, well, most experiencers have positive experiences. There was the Free study that polled experiencers, but to my knowledge, did a very poor job of policing the data, doing data hygiene, ensuring that those with a negative experience came forward to share that. And we saw with difficult human on human phenomena in the past, people who have had, for example, a sexual assault or sexual abuse in their childhood, society would not acknowledge that for a very long time as a real thing. And the victims were gaslit. They were blamed as having some sort of psycho-emotional issue or ideation that this never really happened. And it took great courage and bravery to break through the barrier of society that it had self-imposed toward the acknowledgement that this was happening. And part of what I believe it took was to find ways that those with all experiences, but in addition, those with negative experiences, felt safe coming forward, disclosing that without fear of reprisal or, what have you, ridicule in the case of the UAP NHI issue. So how do we get a more, a truer picture of the experience and its characteristics? What kind of research or data collection would bring that forward? How would we do that in your view?
Well, let's go back to your comment about the child abuse, the normalization of the understanding that child abuse occurs and that parents do it. That wasn't really a groundswell type development in information. It didn't come from the ground up and a hue and cry until psychology stepped up. What it took was a couple of dedicated researchers who recognized the proper time at a proper panel to bring that information out in an environment that it would be accepted and listened to. And when that happened, it changed everything. From that point forward, the conversation sort of snowballed, because not only were the psychologists that were encountering this hearing about it from their clients, they'd lived it themselves. It was pervasive. And that's what made the change. So that's why I don't really worry too much about ufology. I put ufology at my back and I focus on moving information into the mainstream environment. I'm not trying to persuade them, because you don't have to use good data to persuade anybody. You just have to show it to them if they have the ability to understand it. And
Right.
And then when it comes to talking about people who have trauma, they kind of have an obligation to listen to you, and they do,
Right.
So some argue that trauma ought to be treated by treat it like you treat all other PTSD. But the first step is recognizing that it is also a source of trauma to be exposed to unidentified aerial phenomena or their occupants. So,
well, you're a firsthand witness to what that trauma is like personally, and I'm sure you've spoken to many others who are witnesses to it. And so, when people start speaking from that experience, and in forums that are credible, that give them, fair representation, credible representation, I think society can't not pay attention after a certain point. The federal acknowledgement is helpful in that it creates kind of a blanket, open space in which to put forward possibilities and to go do research, gather data, and bound those into probabilities, and then make assessments. And ultimately, what decision makers will need is data in order to inform their responses, policy, So there is a little bit of a virtuous cycle here where authority figures can grant kind of like air cover for the conversation. The conversation can arise as we're having here, as the series that we'll be getting tomorrow is going to be creating. And that then spurs a new line of efforts regarding collecting data where it matters most. And then that data, if substantial, credible, if collected methodically with good sound research principles behind it, can then generate findings that can then be highly influential to decision makers, to trigger them to do what must be done, and also to reach society at large and convince them that there is a there, because that moves the Overton window, right? That's the voting public. And so ultimately, we seem a long way away from the public's opinion about UFOs dictating who gets elected in a specific county, city, state, nation. But ultimately, as I think you and I both feel, we are sitting on top of what could be the biggest event in human history, and it is almost completely unacknowledged. There could be nothing more dangerous to the stability of the world than that non-acknowledgement, that disassociation from what reality is now presenting us with. And so, you and I and others in this field, and it's empty at the top because there's a crowd at the bottom, right? Part of the call is for those who are in the historic legacy conversation about UFOs to elevate, to be a part of this new credible dialogue that's pointed, like you're saying, at society, at the mainstream of life, call them into it and up. And that, is my ever-present calling to those watching the show who follow Emergent, is to get involved, is to be a citizen advocate, activist, scientist, researcher, what have you, whatever your skill set is, bring it to bear on this issue, because there's a thin band of people between this enigma, which is enormous and has tremendous power to destabilize, if not to exert its own effects intentionally on the world and on individual experiencers, but then the largely ignorant world at large that is completely out of touch with what reality is now presenting us. So there's kind of like, we're trapped between a rock and a hard place. And there's very few of us in that gap doing important work to create space and to break down those imposed barriers. And so, yes, please get involved. That's my ever-present call to those watching. But Ted, I'm curious, and I look forward to exploring this as the series goes on. What kind of field research, coordinated field collaborations, what kind of in-the-moment, real-time intelligence gathering could be potentially done to gain greater insight into what we'll hear about tomorrow night in Michael Cifone's talk, this new relational space, this phenomenological space in which the experience of the phenomenon is occurring for the human being witness, right? So there is an environment in which an event is taking place, and it is more relational than forensic, right? It's not just a bullet hit a wall and we're going to go stare at the bullet and study the kinematics and the exhaust and all that. It's like, no, there were people there. They saw things, they felt things. There were people in the neighborhood before it even happened, days before it happened, right? So if we don't collect all of what the phenomenon, which is what it's doing and how we are experiencing it, all of that, we're missing out on a tremendous amount of data, in fact. And so let's think through as the series goes on, as we go from scientific and research foundations to signs and signals of intelligence. From there, we'll go to consciousness and cognitive frontiers, communication and contact, societal, psychological, and cultural impacts, close encounters and direct exposures, public safety and responsible engagement, and then finally, ethics, law, and international preparedness. As we move through that, I would like to explore with you, what are the most potentially powerful, insightful forms of data collection possible to us and available to us. Any thoughts before we get?
It's going to be a great opportunity.
Effort. Yeah.
Great opportunity, I think. The one thing I don't want to do in this field is waste time. That's the one constraint we all have. And I put 25 years in on the forensic side of all this, but let's take it to the next step. And how do we do that responsibly and carefully and abide by the rules of scientific research and publication while we're doing it? And let's not, reinvent the wheel. Let's just do it better, do it smart.
And Ted, what do you see? Why can we waste no time? What is the compelling factor or the exigency that should be driving this effort?
Well, we're changing as a culture, and so is the phenomenon. The reports are different now than they were in the 60s and the 50s. So exploring those differences would probably be a good idea, but it's more of a reminder that if we're dealing with another intelligence, it probably has an agenda. And the sooner we understand that, the better off we are. All things being equal. And so we need to lay foundation quickly, develop that base or expand the philosophy of science to be able to competently engage on the topic of non-human intelligence, what it is, how to recognize it, how to think about it. Because living in a situation where we're constantly comparing them to us is not going to give us insights into them.
Right.
Yeah,
so if all our behavior models, relational models are essentially extrapolated from human engagements or animal engagements, but many of those
That's
are
right.
extrapolated from human engagements.
Sure.
We have to potentially, as Michael Cifone will talk about tomorrow, invert that pyramid
Hmm.
and think dramatically outside the box.
That's right. Learn how to think about non-human intelligence, because we don't know how to do it. Not yet.
Right.
And as I'm sure you know, as we've sat here and kind of dealt with this Gordian knot, I've sat and stared at the ceiling many nights, trying to see how much of I could get my brain around the idea of it. Always limited, always limitations.
Yeah. Yeah.
Finding out later that there's more.
Right.
So,
Well, time may be ticking in ways we don't understand, and of course, the phenomenon,
that's
like
right.
you're saying, it's also an actor on the stage. We often treat it as almost inert, like a natural
Mhm.
phenomenon that's just like the wind blowing over the mountains consistently, and
Mhm.
it's not.
Mhm.
And so,
It is
there
not.
are indications of fundamental shifts in the dynamic of what UAP are doing in the sky and in the ocean, how they're interacting in different places at different times surrounding different human events, uh, around different human technological developments. For example, the development of nuclear energy and nuclear weapons, the atomic age, right, is probably the strongest, almost incontrovertible data point we have right now about intent that we can look at is when we developed nuclear weapons and deployed them on Earth against one another, they came, they
Mhm.
appeared, and they responded. So it is responsive. I see all across the board signs of intelligence, but also covert intention to operate covertly
Yes.
and potentially to be subversive in that covert operation. And so we need to interrogate those activities, just like we would interrogate, a witness on the scene of some kind of event or some kind of crime that's been committed, right? You ask everyone what they saw. You don't treat
Mhm.
anyone as innocent necessarily, especially if they're acting covertly. So, I'm curious, Ted, how have you seen the phenomenon change from your historic involvement on this? How has it changed from the 50s, 60s up to the present?
Well, I think one of the biggest changes is our realization that it isn't just visible in the visual spectrum. And by learning how to look into the infrared and ultraviolet, we're realizing that there's a whole other dimension to the presence. Um, and the Tedescos have taken point on that, John and Jerry. Um, and I recommend that if you haven't looked at their work, go ahead. They also brought us a case of uh, where they were actually assaulted by a UAP they were looking at. And I
Mhm.
have those videos on our the UAPmed YouTube channel. But all of it reminds us that on the one hand they weren't killed by the thing, but on the other hand they were definitely paralyzed by it. It,
Right,
it it
right,
it affected its power over them without their consent, and all because they were looking at it. Um,
right.
so there's a lot to these are the things that are changing is our the signals intelligence we're getting, our ability to look in different bandwidths, this kind of stuff. It's changing the whole thing. It used to be if you saw it, if you remember in the 60s, if it didn't come with a radar signal, there was no proof, right? It had to have
Mhm.
a radar signature with it, or it wasn't there, until we
Yep.
realized that intermittent radar detectability is probably a characteristic of at least some UAP, right? Because we
Mhm.
had reports of visual observations with no radar, and then we had reports of both, right?
Right.
So we started
Mhm.
rethinking that, and there were only about 4 or 5 profiles of observation at the time. There were spheres and balls of light. There were geometric forms, not so common, triangulars and rectangle type
Mhm.
objects, and then there were disks and oblate spheroids, and then there were cylinders. So, and now we're realizing that there are whole families of things that we hadn't observed before until we expanded our sensing capacity.
Right,
So,
right.
which changes our whole thing. Okay, now it's one thing to say, okay, we reported this thing flying from A to Z, and they cities on both ends saw it, and the time is right, and we know how fast it went and everything. And that's really cool. But it's something else to suddenly, start scanning your hometown in infrared and realizing that there's 2 or 3 of these things hovered over your city.
Right.
And who knows how long they've been there and what they're doing, and why they're invisible, outside of our visual. Is it just their technology that does that, or is there an intent behind it?
Mm-hmm. Right. I mean, there does seem to be indications of more overt daytime displays of presence early on in the phenomenon. Ones that were more concentrated around military and atomic warfare sites.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was a shift to more nighttime, close approach to civilian targets or populations.
Mm-hmm.
And so possibly a shift to be more veiled in their activity as our technology developed, our sensing abilities developed dramatically. And our broad social awareness that they might be here, something might be here. Roughly half of Americans believe UFOs are real, possibly more. I think it might be a lot more. And so as we brought their existence, into our kind of conceptual framework of human life, place on Earth, place in the cosmos, for them to operate, initially when they did not exist in that framework, they could potentially do so in broad daylight. And, people would see something go by and they had no anchors, right? We didn't know about exoplanetary bodies that could harbor life. There was no concept of a plausible extraterrestrial reality, right? And so these things could whiz around and we might self-obfuscate their existence. Well, now, not so much.
Go back to like Fermi and Teller and the Fermi paradox. That whole conversation happened over lunch, and it started with whether or not UFOs existed and whether they would discover anything that moved the speed of light or faster. And then then the conversation morphed, and then Fermi sat down and wrote his reductionist equation, right? And blurted out, where are they? Because he'd already thrown out the idea that they were here.
With you, because they had to be detectable and visual. Whereas what you're saying, Ted, is we now know that they do not necessarily need to appear in the visual spectrum.
That's right. And
to be physically present.
So, and this is going to be some of what Michael Cifone is going to be talking about tomorrow. And I'm going to be really excited to hear what he has to say, is that gap, between, ignoring UFO data and then writing science.
Right.
It was a great equation, right? But the one flaw was the one that would have not made it a paradox.
Right.
Right. And,
what if they cannot be detected? What if they are already here? And so why ask the question, where are they? What kind of a question would that be?
Exactly.
Right.
So and how many different iterations of this have occurred in science, and amongst otherwise really bright people. I mean, these people that we're lining up for this lecture series are some of the brightest minds I've ever encountered, and out of luck they're engaging a topic that concerns me, and I think that people like Julia Mossbridge, for example, she's just brilliant. Looking forward to what she might have to say, and the same with Garry Nolan, and Michael, all of those guys. There are really bright people out there. And some of them are bright enough to get beyond the stigma and actually take a look at what's going on.
Right. So I have on screen here, maybe we can share this. This is a screen share of the session research roadmap. Having a little bit of a challenge getting things up on screen. But, we do want to let folks know that we're starting off. This will do. It's the other one, but I'll start here. This is good. Investigating non-human intelligence. The journey begins November, tomorrow, in fact. And what is the journey? Well, the journey is advancing into this new terrain with our best capabilities, our best methods and approaches, and generating key data that does not yet exist, or taking the data that we have, to your point, Ted, the wealth of data collected over 80 years, and using new capabilities, new methods of research, machine learning, ways to analyze that data in bulk to come up with key signatures and indicators that would then cause us to get into the field to go collect the new real-time data that we need. So that is the journey, a groundbreaking journey to the frontiers of human knowledge with the best minds in science, research, and investigation. Tomorrow's lecture, Toward a Science of Non-Human Intelligence. Philosopher of science Michael Cifone will present a critical framework for approaching the possible existence of non-human intelligence through scientific inquiry. And this is what I wanted to get up a little bit earlier. There's all the links you need, all the QR codes. I'm going to leave that up for a minute so you can scan those and get to where you need. But this is just the beginning. These are just the initial scientific foundations, part one of this 8-part journey. And I'd like to share now what those 8 parts are, Ted, and then talk kind of about what this journey, where this journey might take us. And you and I don't know either, right? We're just creating the environment for this to happen. Is there a desire for this to happen? Are there willing participants? Are there willing subject matter experts? Right? Is society ready to critically think about this existence, this presence, this potential activity or not? So we're going to find out. But there's no better question to be asking and journey to take, in my opinion. But I'd like to put up here, it's the other screen share. We can get that up. And so scientific and research foundations is but part one. I actually rattled off the other 7 parts to you.
Right.
There we go. But I just wanted to put this up on screen to give you a sense of the scope and depth of what we are attempting to tackle here. So we have identified collectively exhaustive, mutually exclusive panorama of themes within these 8 parts of the series. So we'll begin with those scientific and research foundations, and then we'll move on to look for signs of intelligence. Are there signs within the data that we have of intelligent behavior and intentful behavior? We'll then look at consciousness, psi, and cognitive frontiers, because if we think, to your point, Ted, if we think of this only as a physical interaction, it has to be visible, right, to the naked eye, we might be excluding a whole range of phenomena that exist at a non-physical level. And that is indeed what is being reported.
It is.
Next, we'll look at communication and contact and examine ways to potentially interpret communication between what might be multiple species, ours and others. Look at linguistic and computational models for interpreting communication that may not come in the form of words and sentences. It may not be overt in that sense. And then, Ted, we'll move into a subject that I know is very close to your work and UAPmed's work, looking at both these topics of psychological and cultural impacts and close approach, exposure, and direct encounters. And then we're going to move into topics, again, also very much up the in the subject matter expertise of UAPmed, public safety and responsible engagement. And then finally, ethics, law, and governance, which is a topic the Human Institute is working intensively on exploring at this time. So we have quite a roadmap ahead of us. What excites you the most as we go into this new terrain? What are you hoping to learn?
Well, what I'm hoping to see is through this multidisciplinary engagement, not only more good information for us, but stimulation for their peers to engage. Because they're stepping out and they're speaking to this, they're doing it with straight face and rationally. Their peers ought to be stimulated, to also be available. And as you mentioned, this is probably going to, as the audience can see it, the foundation is with the first subjects, and then it builds the second, third, and fourth. But then we go back and we'll start really boring into each one of these areas. We're also inviting people to bring their own topics. We're not limiting them just to the ones that we've offered here. But
yes, that's right. Right, and we invite you to submit an abstract to present either a presentation, a panel, or possibly even a paper. So that link we'll have available at the end of the show here, and so please share that around. We are putting out the message to society at large. Who is ready to begin talking about this and to apply their body of knowledge and their specific expertise toward doing so. We have to leverage our human assets and capabilities on our own behalf. If we leave this in the realm of speculation and novel theorizing, it will diminish in credibility. It'll be bundled up in ridicule and thrown into the waste bin of the paranormal, of what some might speculate to exist but doesn't exist, right? That's how the mainstream would put it. This must not be in that zone, right? And I think everyone watching knows that. And so it's going to be a collective effort to begin to shift this, move this boat in the water and point it in a new direction, and then consistently and with discipline power up those motors and go in that direction over time. And there are forces at play that would like us to not do that, that would like to keep this a non-reality, that would like to undermine its credibility, or that would like to shape how we see it. And, we will get into eventually topics of the spread of memes in society regarding NHI, entities, aliens, the potential signatures of disinformation efforts that might historically have been attempted around this issue, all valuable lines of inquiry. Now, after Michael Cifone's talk tomorrow, tell us more about the presenters we have on deck to continue that journey.
Well, after Michael, next month will be Garry Nolan. And do we have his outline yet?
We don't have his presentation yet, but we have a overall topic range that Garry has discussed with us.
Okay.
And that's to basically look at the research roadmap.
Right.
So if we were to get out into the field, what kind of data would we want to collect? What would constitute evidence? Is it biological? Is it computational? Is it at some other level? So hopefully Michael Cifone can broaden the lens and help us to think with epistemic humility, but also openness to an inversion of our pyramids of thinking. And then Dr. Garry Nolan can kind of travel down that road further with us and take us into, what does the roadmap look like for gaining actual evidence about non-humans, that they're physically here, that they're communicating, that they're signaling us in the sky and the ocean. What would it take to demonstrate that existence?
Well, thank you. I hadn't followed up on Gary's information, but then I think we're talking about Julia Mossbridge in the cognitive area, cognitive sciences, perhaps talking a bit about psi function. Her background is with IONS, Institute for Noetic Sciences, and she's a psi researcher there, focused on precognitive abilities. She's very brilliant, and given that telepathy and various types of psi function have been reported by people with UAP exposures, I think it's relevant that we dig in there. And so I'm looking forward to that presentation. Ron Westrom is on our list as well. He's a sociologist who's been working in ufology as long as I've been alive. As you can see, I'm not a spring chicken. And I look forward to his insights. He has some perspectives on the density of exposures in our society. In other words, how many people are being influenced by these things directly. And he has some other great ideas. I met him at the conference in Toulouse, where he was presenting some information about hidden events. And so I look forward to hearing his talk as well. We're talking about bringing Massimo Teodorani into the fold, and he has a wealth of information on every level. He was the lead researcher at the EMBLA project with Erling Strand and Hestel in Norway, and has a lot of background in field research. So I look forward to all of this, and there's more. We have a lot of people lining up, but we just can't list them because they're not committed yet. But I'm looking forward to that.
Yes, me as well. And again, if you register for this series, you'll have priority questions to the speakers. And so the questions for tomorrow are already up and open. So please get in there, ask your questions, be highly engaged. This is your opportunity to be a part of this investigation, to meaningfully shape its direction, to add your cognitive power to our collective human intelligence, the HI, which we often forget is involved in this new relational space with a potential NHI. And so it really does need all of us. We have to get out of the hero mindset, the expert, what do they call that? This deferral to authority that some PhD knows, some president will tell us what to do, some politician has it all figured out. We don't have it all figured out, right? Nothing like this has ever happened before, potentially on Earth, that we have been engaged at a whole society, whole civilization level en masse at high volume with direct encounters taking place, potential direct communications taking place. And all the while, society has been veiled from view by the mainstream of not just your country's society, but the international community and its societies. So it's quite unparalleled, and no better opportunity to get in on the ground floor of what could end up being the biggest event that could shape how we move forward as a species, what kind of technologies we develop, how we equitably distribute those technologies and steward the resources of this earth such that we don't become dependent on external sources and inputs, which at any time could be on offer, right? So we, as I like to say, are not just encountering a non-human intelligence, but a non-human reality. Mm-hmm. It's bigger than just intelligence. It's the whole systemic nature of multiple intelligences and networks of intelligence and everything that they transmit, from information to resources of value and beyond, right? And so, there is a point at which we can only speculate, and I fully acknowledge that. I think there is responsible speculation to be done on those front lines. Mm-hmm. And that's why I created the platform Forerunner, for those who want to get out to that furthest edge of what we can know and ask the questions that will probe us to go further and to go figure out what we can know, lest we sit on our laurels and think that, whatever knowledge we've accrued basically accounts for what's going on, which in this field can never be the case. It is an almost unlimited, nonstop journey to the bleeding edge. And so some people need to get used to living there. And I know there are a lot of experiencers on Forerunner who are living there, like it happened to them, and they have not had anything to deal with, to use to deal with that experience. So please get on Forerunner, be a part of that conversation. Well, Ted, I look forward to this journey with you and seeing what comes up and arises. And we're going to have some world-class speakers, some great thinkers. We hope that this also is a bit of a signal to mainstream academia, the research community, maybe the policymakers, to say, look, the conversation is happening that has needed to happen for a very long time. And we're going to guardrail it well. We're going to keep it founded in empiricism, logic, the need for data to drive findings and assessments. So I think we all acknowledge that's a very intelligent, coherent sequence. And so before we leap to a belief or to a conclusion, there has to be foundational work to build up to that point. Now, I say often on the show, well, go ahead, Ted, please.
I was just going to say, what you call foundational work is logic. It's rational engagement. If this is so and this is so, we do not shirk from this also being so.
Right.
That's the process. We build the logic, the information one at a time, and make it sound, and then build a road, build a path to the final information. So
now I know I'm a huge advocate of logic. People know that who follow me here. And I do hear often, a frustration. It can't just be logic, right? Non-human intelligence won't follow our logic. What good is our logic? Well, I'll tell you this, folks. We have to use our human capabilities on our own behalf. And logic is one of them. Second, we have to build the foundation for something of a collective response, not just a preferred personal response. So you can believe in entity A or B or C from star system D, E, or F, but will anyone else believe that? Right? They won't believe the way you believe. And we have many different belief systems already that could easily divide and fragment our human response to this. Religious belief systems, political theories and belief systems, etc. So this is why, to your point, Ted, about foundational information, as you first described it, the data to drive that knowledge base, and then the logic to move sequentially in a way that would be convincing for hopefully a majority of humans so that we can have a collective response versus a fractured and divided response.
So that we can rely on the information ourselves. You
Yeah.
know, it has to work for us. And logic doesn't deny what an individual experiencer experiences. You know, it's not the enemy. You know, it's part of epistemology. It's how we establish knowledge. You know, and learn to put our weight on it, learn to trust it.
Right.
So it's not the enemy. You know, we have very high expectations of scientists, and I'm hoping Ron Westrom's going to talk about that a little bit, because he reminds us all the time, before you start making any lofty pronunciations about science and scientists, remember that they're people first, and they became scientists, and a lot of them are not monks who have joined the cult of the philosophy of science. You know, so so they aren't going to be what you think they ought to be in terms of rational and supportive of you. There's a whole spectrum of them, but the ones we want to work with are the ones that are grounded and accept logic first over their own emotions and look carefully at what's going on. So, anyway,
and there are other ways to build this knowledge of what is, and I think allowing for mystery is very important. It's been very important for me in my spiritual life, to allow things to arise organically without control or the illusion of self-control. Very important. But I think logic is that solid rope that takes you up to the peak. It doesn't guide you the whole way. It takes you over the rough patches, and there are other patches that require a different set of capabilities.
That's right.
Where you have to scamper up that scree slope where there's no strong or solid foothold. And I know you know that very well, Ted, from personal experience.
Yeah.
And we're going to have to trudge through the unknown and overcome the resistance that exists to it becoming known within ourselves, certainly within each other, certainly probably within the phenomenon as we encounter it. So it's going to be a dynamic human journey. And, I think if we frame it that way, it's not under it's not owned by one discipline or one kind of subset of our human knowledge base, right? We need science. We need intelligence gathering. We need direct testimony and experiencer support. We need the religious and the mystical side of this engaged as well. This is how we sense reality and its multiple dimensions. Now, I think we need to also guard ourselves, put up some guardrails. We are trying to solve the enigma of this hard physical phenomenon that appears to manifest non-physically as well, but in an intelligent, coordinated fashion, with some possible strategy at play that we have to decode on a timeline necessary for our human response. If we don't, we may end up different human beings in 100 years than we are today. Not because anyone or anything is malevolent, right? But just because when two intelligences interact, when two civilizations collide, when technology is transferred, when ideas and concepts traverse boundaries and get absorbed into religious thinking, cultural thinking, you end up changing. And we have to be actors with agency deciding, do we want to change in these ways? How should we change? And this kind of gets down to like a fundamental, I don't know if it's a right or a privilege or a fundamental characteristic of sentience, which is the ability to perceive self, to look back, to look forward, and to articulate a desire, a desired path. And I think as human beings, individually and collectively, we should never relinquish our right to choose, our right to consent, and our right to have a vision and to pursue it for our own interests. So there's a lot at stake.
There is. And you mentioned time constraints. That's kind of the thing. The constraint is understanding. We need to be able to understand this and trust the information that we've developed so that we can make good decisions.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's a privilege to be in this with you and to offer this from the position of the Human Institute on my side, and from your side with UAPmed, Ted. So a model for collaboration, and I look forward to seeing other collaborations take shape out there. So we have to be collaborating to solve the problem for the greater good. That is a conviction I've had since the very beginning.
Can't do it alone. Nobody's the one in this. This is going to be a multidisciplinary engagement, and as it should be. So.
Yeah. Critical as well to just resist those impulses to be the one, right? To be the hero of disclosure, to be the one.
Ego. Yeah.
Right. Check the ego. And I know you've done a lot of work on that in your spiritual work. I've done quite a bit in mine. So it's interesting how things prepare you for moments that you could never imagine coming into being. And then there you are at that new starting line.
Well, I think that's why I took that walk. You know what I mean? That's why I did that experience, was because I couldn't predict the future.
Yeah.
But I wanted to be grounded in the best way I could be for it. So I chose a path that worked for me so far.
Good.
But in any case, I'm very much looking forward to these talks and this lecture. I've very much enjoyed working with you so far, Reed, and I look forward to the future and all of that. And we'll be doing this talk tomorrow, and that's going to be a good time. Michael's a very engaging person. So
very, yes. Let me put this back up on stage here, or maybe we can just remove that. See if we can put the slide up on screen of Michael Cifone's talk. 5 o'clock Eastern. You can hit that QR code. It'll be streaming on the Human Institute YouTube channel. Yep. And look forward to seeing you there. Take a look at the other speakers that'll be posted to the speaker page shortly. Like and follow the platform. Submit your proposal to speak or be part of a panel. We're actively seeking speakers at this moment, and be a part of the investigation. And with that, I want to thank you for joining Ted and I, as we begin to open up this new investigatory journey, looking at the fundamental nature, presence, and possible activity of a non-human intelligence in our world. With that, I'll say good night, and I look forward to seeing you at the first lecture of Investigating NHI.